Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for a conversation on the new Federal Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Welcome, landlords. Jump to the next slide, please. Currently you all are muted. If you have questions, please go ahead and you can type them into the question and answer box on Zoom. This call is being recorded. If you object to being recorded, please disconnect now and reach out to us so we can find another way to give you get this information. All right. So welcome. Thank you again for taking the time to join us today. My name is Adam Schaefer. I'm a Deputy Associate Director in the Division of Housing Stabilization at DHCD, joined by my colleagues Claire Marcus, Lexi Gruber, and Gabrielle Brookins, who are assisting with this training. All right, so we want to start, so we're going to start off with a welcome, some goals and objectives. Then I'll go over a brief overview of the Federal Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or ERAP. Then we'll go into a little bit more detail on applying for assistance and what landlords can do. Then we'll save some time at the end for questions and answers, as well as share some next steps and resources and support. We have a jam-packed agenda and a lot to cover, so looking forward to getting started and hearing any questions you have. All right, so we want to start off getting to know who's in the room. So if you could, please go to menti.com on your smartphone or computer browser, and that's MENTI.com, and enter the code 3389-6225 into the field shown on the right. Again, that's 3389-6225. We'd like to know what your name is, how many tenants you have, if you've applied for assistance already, if you've attended an ERAP training session already. All right, so again, that's menti.com, menti.com, code 3389-6225. All right, I think our results are hidden.
Just for this first question, Adam.
Oh, great. All right, so why don't we go on to the second question. How many tenants do you have? Oh, here we go. Have you attended an ERAP training session already? Great. For many of you, it looks like this will be new. That is great. All right. Great. Well, thank you all again for joining the call today. Again, as questions come up, please go ahead and click the QA button on the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer questions at the end of the session. Let me go ahead and get started.
I'm sorry, I think there might be two more quick questions.
All right, let's see. Oh, perfect. Thank you. All right, and now we have a question. How many tenants do you have? Great, so it looks like we've got a good mix, a good number of people in the 15 to 20 category. All right. And why don't we go forward to the next slide, the final question. And the last question is, have you applied for assistant already? This RAFT, ERAP, or IRMA. Great. So again, it looks like we got a few RAFT veterans and some folks this will be new for. So that is great to hear. All right. We hope this is useful for everyone, whether you've applied for RAFT or helped your tenant apply, or this is new. All right. Why don't we go ahead and rejoin our presentation. So the objective of today's session is to review the new Federal Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or ERAP, and provide an understanding of the new programs and policies. So again, we want to provide landlords with guidance on how to apply on behalf of your tenants. We know some of you may have been in a few other ERAP training sessions, but we really wanted to have a dedicated session for landlords. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so now we're going to dive into a few slides that provide an overview of ERAP. So again, the Federal Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or ERAP, is a federally funded emergency housing assistance program for renters in particular impacted by COVID-19. So the Department of Housing and Community Development in Massachusetts has received $437 million in use it or lose it federal emergency rental assistance dollars. Federal law allows the Treasury to recapture this funding if we do not spend 65% of these federal dollars. So we're doing our best to reach out to landlords like you all and tenants directly to make sure that folks who may have been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic and who were struggling to pay their rent have an ability to pay the rent and really to make landlords whole for the rent that you are owed. Also, we want to flag landlords owning up to 20 units are eligible to apply directly on behalf of their tenants. And tenants, of course, are eligible to apply themselves directly. All right, and this program actually is already in process. We're using the existing RAFT application form that you may all be familiar with. And we started making ERAP awards actually starting on March 22nd. So are excited to get this project, to get these funds flowing to landlords in need and help stabilize tenancies. Right, next slide, please. We want to give a quick comparison between the RAFT program, or Residential Assistance for Families Transition, and the ERAP program. This is the new Federal Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Some of you may be familiar with RAFT. It's been around for I think about a decade now, and is a state-funded program, but is quite small now that we're thinking about comparing it to ERAP. So under the RAFT program, this program was for renters and owners up to 50% of area median income, whereas ERAP, we can actually reach renters at even higher income levels. So renters up to 80% area median income. But for the ERAP program, we're actually not serving homeowners. Homeowners can still, of course, this wouldn't be relevant for many of you all, but homeowners can still access the RAFT program and still access a program we operate called IRMA, which is specifically for homeowners at the higher end of the income spectrum. So with RAFT, we were providing up to $10,000 in rental, mortgage, and utilities assistance in a 12-month period. Whereas for ERAP, we're actually, this is for applicants that are for up to 12 months of arrears that were accrued after March 13th, 2020, so just over a year ago. What's important to flag here is that there actually isn't a dollar cap on the ERAP program. It's all based on the number of months that are owed. So whether that's $100 a month for 12 months or $1,000 a month for 12 months, ERAP can cover both of those. So again, that's 12 months of arrears can be covered. And applicants are also eligible for an additional 3 months of stipends. So that's forward rent. So a monthly stipend in a 3-month chunk. Again, want to emphasize that while the eligibility is based on the renter's eligibility, the dollars flow directly to the landlord or the property owner in both of these cases. So it really pays to have your tenants in this program. So finally, what does the benefit cover? RAFT covers overdue or future rent, mortgage costs, utilities, and moving expenses. And ERAP similarly covers overdue or future rent costs, tenant paid utilities, and moving expenses. All right, let's go ahead and move on. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about tenant eligibility. So tenants must certify that they've experienced a financial hardship related to COVID-19 to receive the ERAP program. There, in the application itself, there's a box to check on the form to say that the tenant has been affected by COVID-19 and a brief explanation. Tenants must also demonstrate that they are at risk of homelessness or housing instability. So for those of you that are familiar with the RAP program, that basically looks like the existing housing crises. That could mean they're behind on, the tenant is behind on rent. Could also mean that the landlord has issued a notice to quit or there's a summons. But again, one thing we want to emphasize is that while a summons and complaint is sufficient to prove that a tenant is at risk of homelessness or instability, it's actually not required. So we don't require you to initiate the eviction process. All we require is that the tenant be have what we call a housing crisis. So that is being behind on rent or being or having trouble paying future rent. Again, we want to emphasize this program is for renters only. So folks looking to stay in their current housing or moving into new rental housing, and their income must be at or below 80% area median income. So that varies a little bit region to region, as well as based on the size of the household. And we'll share some information about what area median income looks like in different parts of the state. All right, next slide, please. Now we're going to talk a little bit about eligible uses of funds. What can ERAP be used for? So again, ERAP can provide up to a maximum of 15 months worth of assistance. So that could be up to 12 months of arrears, plus up to 3 months stipends at a time. Again, there's no dollar cap on ERAP funds. So that means whether that was a $200 a month for 12 months or $1,500 a month for 12 months, ERAP can cover all of it. There isn't a dollar cap. It really is all about those number of months that the tenant and landlord is seeking funding for. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into how ERAP can be used in the following expenses. So on rental arrears, really important here, and this is distinct from RAFT. ERAP can only be used for rent due on or after March 13th, 2020, so the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Cannot exceed a period exceeding 12 months. So if the tenant owes more than 12 months, ERAP can only cover 12 months. And for renters with an income-based subsidy, it can only cover the tenant paid portion of the rent. So if they have an MRVP, they could only cover the tenant paid portion. Of course, it can also only cover the up to the maximum of the contract rent for folks in market units or without any subsidies. We can't make rent payments for amounts that are beyond the rent that was due. In terms of future rent, stipends may be paid for rent due after the time of application, but only approved in 3-month increments. If the tenant has rental arrears, at least a portion of the arrears must be paid for the applicant to receive an ERAP stipend. We want to make sure that if tenants owe their landlords anything, that at least some of those arrears are addressed. For the 3 months of stipends, ERAP stipends will pay for 100% of the household's future monthly rent, regardless of income. Again, that's the contract rent, however much the tenant is expected to pay according to the lease. And the tenant, we're still working out the details on this piece, but there may be an opportunity for additional 3 months periods of stipends, but we're still working out the details there. And again, renters with income-based rental subsidies, so Section 8, MRVP, etc., can only receive assistance to cover the tenant-paid portion of the rent arrears, but are not eligible for arrears. So again, folks with a subsidy where their income or their rent changes based on their income, those folks are not eligible for future stipends. We also want to let you know, these payments wouldn't be going directly to some of you wouldn't be going directly to you. ERAP can also be used for utility assistance. So the RAA that is processing the application can facilitate payments of up to $1,500 per household to pay for tenant-paid utility arrears dating back to March 13, 2020. Again, that's that same bright line that we discussed with arrears. And those $1,500 can go to electricity, gas, or water sewer. Also, they could go to one delivery of tenant-paid heating fuel, such as oil, propane, wood pellets. ERAP can also, similar to RAF, can also be used for folks that are moving into one of your units. ERAP can cover first and last month's rent, security deposits, moving trucks, and furniture payments up to $1,000. Households with an income-based local, state, or federal subsidy for the rent, like MRVP, are eligible for arrears only. And again, just like everyone else, eligible for up to 12 months of arrears payments. They're eligible for moving expenses and utilities, but they're not eligible for stipends. We wanted to let you know that just for your awareness, for larger landlords, we're working on a program called SHIRA, and that's for some of our larger subsidized units. So our goal there, again, this is separate from the ERAP program, but we want to let you know that there is this program for much larger landlords. And our goal with that is really to kind of take some of the pressure off the REAs so that smaller landlords like you all can apply directly and have your applications processed as quickly as possible. All right. Now we're going to dive into applying for assistance and how you can help your tenants submit a complete application and get your application processed as quickly as possible. So landlords who own up to 20 rental units can apply directly for rental assistance on behalf of their eligible residents. We call this our quote unquote landlord door. And also, we're not going to go into a ton of detail here, but tenants can also apply directly for the RAFT and ERAP programs. But we're going to focus right now on how landlords can initiate that application, particularly for tenants who might not have the ability to initiate an application. So first step, we ask that you coordinate with your tenants. It's really important that folks coordinate with your tenants before applying for rental assistance so you can get your application processed as quickly as possible. We want to avoid duplicate applications, which can really slow down the process. Landlords must also obtain and submit a signed tenant consent form before applying for assistance. So while you can do a lot of the work to get this process moving and complete the application, ultimately we do require that landlords obtain a signed tenant consent form before applying for assistance. And we also recommend that you ensure that you're do your best to ensure that your tenant is eligible for the program before applying. So the tenant income eligibility limit is 80% of area median income for the ERAP program. And we'll be sharing these slides after the after this presentation and can go over and we'll share some information on those AMI limits in your city or town. All right. So a few easy steps if you believe your tenant may be eligible for rental assistance. Again, if you're a landlord and believe your tenant may be eligible, you should ask your tenant if they've already applied. And if not, start an application for them. We'll be sharing the links to the REA or Regional Administrating Agency websites where those applications live. And you can get your application started. Again, if you're thinking, is my tenant eligible? I think the main triggers you should think is, are they having trouble paying their rent? And are they below 80% area median income? Those steps can help you make sure that that they're eligible, and have a conversation with them and see if they've already started a RAFT application or an RAFT, IRMA, or ERAP application. All right, next slide, please. So now we're going to go through what this looks like if you want to apply for assistance on your tenant's behalf. So first, again, ask your tenant if they've applied. If not, start gathering the required documents. Then have the tenant sign the consent form. Then we'll have the landlord have you submit the application and consent form to the REA or Regional Administrating Agencies. Again, these are the organizations that administer the ERAP program. Then the applicant will then receive notification that the application is submitted. Then if there's documents missing from the application, the landlord and tenant would receive a notification listing which documents are missing. Landlord and tenant would then receive, hopefully would then provide any additional missing documents. Then the landlord and tenant would receive notification that the application has been approved or denied. And then finally, if approved, the landlord and tenant would receive terms of agreement to participate. All right. Next slide, great. Each application has the documents required, and we really encourage you as much as possible to submit a complete application with all required documents. While in some cases you can submit an incomplete application, this does slow down the process. So the fastest way to get you paid is really to submit a complete application with all the required information. So the first, most important, is the tenant consent form. All adult household members must sign the tenant consent form before a landlord can submit the application. We also require landlord address and contact information. We'll ask in the application the reason for the application. This is where that ties back to that housing crisis question. Is somebody in the household struggling? Is the tenant struggling to pay rent? Are they behind on rent? Maybe you've already initiated an eviction process. Those are the kinds of things we want to hear about in the application. We'll ask a little bit more about the specific assistance being requested. In most cases for you all, this would be probably having arrears or overdue rent covered. Then the application asks a little bit more about household information. So information about the name, date of birth, sex, race, ethnicity, and social for adult household members. We'll ask for an ID of the head of household. And then finally, rental information. So a lease or tenancy agreement that shows the amount of rent and amount of arrears, if any. And then finally, we'll ask for proof of the renter's household income. And we'll dive into that a little bit deeper and what we're looking for there. And then finally, we'll ask for your W-9 for the landlord or property owner and proof of ownership that you are indeed the owner of the property. Let me continue on. And I see there's some questions in the chat. We're going to go through this and then we will circle back to your questions. So thank you, and please keep them coming. Income eligibility is one of the most important parts of this program. We want to make sure that we're targeting these funds to folks who are lower income, and through that, we've tried to expand the ways that we can verify income and make it as painless as possible, both for you all, for the organizations that administer the program, and of course for the applicants. So the first way we do this is on the back end, on our end. we try to match all applicants against databases with the Department of Transitional Assistance and Mass Health. We do this to say if anybody in the household is receiving DTA benefits or Mass Health benefits, we say they are what we call presumed income eligible. This means that we don't need any additional documentation, no additional information. We assume that because they are receiving these benefits, they are automatically income eligible for ERAP, for the ERAP program. Another way, if that doesn't work, is we can also receive eligibility letters for folks in certain income-based programs. We can also look up applicants in state databases. This includes the unemployment insurance database and the pandemic and see folks who are receiving pandemic unemployment or unemployment assistance, or PUA. Tenants can also provide documentation themselves. This can include a 2020 tax return, again, the most recent tax return from 2020, the Form 1040. They can also submit proof of monthly income. So this could be pay stubs or a benefit award letter, anything that shows kind of the frequency that they're being paid and that can help us get to an annual income. And then finally, if they truly have zero income, they can attest that they have zero income. All right, next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the benefit letters. So folks that are receiving DTA benefits, LIHEAP or childcare benefits, or benefits from the Department of Veterans Services, a benefit letter from those agencies can also help us to identify whether somebody's income eligible. And then also an income-based rent determination letter. So for many of you, this might not be relevant, but a letter from a local housing authority or an REA for state or federal public housing or subsidized housing vouchers, anyone that any agency that is making income determinations for rent, that would also be an acceptable way to prove income. Right. Next slide, please. All right, so you'll hear us say this a few times, but an application that is fully complete with all required documentation will be processed faster. Incomplete applications will be closed if the documentation is requested and not provided within 14 days of request of these documents. We really encourage you to make sure, as you're submitting applications, ensure that all required documentation is included. All right. And of course, we want to mention folks can reapply after that if they are closed out, but to make sure that you all can get benefits as quickly as possible and your tenants can have their housing stabilized, you can reapply, but really we really encourage folks to have a fully complete application. All right. Now we're going to shift over to a Menti one more time. So if you could go back to menti.com and enter the code 338962225 into the field shown on the right. And then we're going to start with a couple questions. Again, that's 338962225. So we can hear a little bit more from you, and then we'll go on to some questions. Right, so again, we ask, we'd love to hear just a little bit about the challenges you're having accessing state rental programs like the RAF program. All right, great. So we are hearing a lot about long processing times. It can be cumbersome. All right, we hear some folks who maybe didn't know about the program. That's great. Please, we want to make sure as many people as possible can know about this program and can access it. All right. Tenants don't respond. Yes, that is certainly a challenge. We've done our best to minimize the amount of information that we need to ask tenants for, but we do need some engagement with them. These are great comments. Thank you. All right. Why don't we go on to the next question? All right, now during the pandemic, what have been some common issues, both financial and non-financial, that you've experienced with your tenants? Apathy, loss of employment. Absolutely, we're hearing a lot about that. Folks who have lost their work during the pandemic and have struggled to get work order repairs. Absolutely, we've been hearing from a lot of the properties that we manage that can be that things are moving a little bit slower. Destructive behavior. Absolutely, we hear this a lot in our permanent supportive housing portfolio. That when folks are spending more time at home. Right, misinformation on the moratorium. Absolutely. Hearing about income and noise complaints. Great. All right. So why don't we go ahead and shift? We're going to go through a few frequently asked questions that I think will address some of the questions we're receiving in the chat, and then we will open it up to you all. All right. First question. If I'm a landlord who agrees to accept funding, do I lose my right to evict a tenant? All right, so this is a question we get a lot. So a landlord who accepts ERAP funding does not lose the ability to file for eviction due to lease violations that may occur in the future. So in all cases, the landlord enters into an agreement with the tenant, which provides that so long as the tenant is paying the agreed upon monthly tenant share of rent and not violating other clauses of the lease, the landlord will not initiate an eviction. But the landlord may still file for an eviction under the following situations. So during or after the ERAP period of agreement, the tenant violates a lease clause that is unrelated to payment of rent. Just one example. During or after the ERAP period of agreement, the tenant maybe doesn't meet the monthly rent payment obligation that is stated in the agreement. That could be the ERAP paid for arrears in the past and maybe might not be paying for stipends and the tenant doesn't cover their share of the rent. Or after the end of the ERAP period of agreement, the tenant does not pay rent or otherwise violates the lease. These are all reasons why, even if you accept ERAP funds, the landlord may still file for eviction. And we do want to emphasize that a landlord cannot evict for non-payment while receiving full stipend payments because the payment would have been made. All right, next question. Does a landlord have to agree to a proposed settlement that would involve forgiveness of arrearages or acceptance of reduced rent for the period of agreement? Those of you that are more familiar with the RAF program may be aware that prior iterations of the program did contemplate had some additional rules, but right now for the ERAP program and for the RAF program, forgiveness of arrearages or acceptance of reduced rent are not program requirements. Really want to emphasize that we are not asking you to forgive arrears to be part of the program. All right. What happens if a tenant moves out of the unit before the ERAP agreement ends? So the rental assistance agreement includes the following language. If the participant's tenancy is terminated prior to the period for which any monthly rental stipends were made, I agree to return the unused balance of said funds to the agency. So for example, let's say on your tenant received ERAP on April 1st of this year. let's say they covered 3 months of arrears, and then the tenant also received 3 months of stipends for April, May, and June. But if the tenant moves out, let's say April 30th, we would ask that you return any funds for May and June because the tenant is no longer in the unit. So again, if the tenant leaves the unit while you're still receiving stipends from through the ERAP program, we ask that we require that you report the move out to the regional administering agency from which you're getting ERAP funds. Again, and this really only applies when there are stipends involved. Next question, if a tenant's income increases, does the rental assistance agreement change? No. So this is different than MRVP or Section 8. The agreement signed by the tenant and the landlord remains in effect for its stated term unless the parties agree to amend it. So ERAP does not change ERAP benefits do not change if the participant's income changes. Another question we get often is, can a tenant apply for ERAP if they've already received $10,000 in RAFT or IRMA or home-based benefits over the last 12 months? These are 3 other programs that DHCD also operates. The answer is yes. However, the ERAP cannot pay for any period of rent already covered by RAFT, IRMA, or home-based. So for example, if RAFT covered all of the rent that was due for December, ERAP couldn't also cover all of that rent that was due because that would be double payment. In the past, we've had some rules about combining RAFT and IRMA and home-based, but those are not in effect right now. So this is different than for some of you that maybe have worked with RAFT in the past. Again, the tenant can receive ERAP even if they've received RAFT or IRMA in the past. We just want to make sure there isn't any double payment. Households may be eligible again for up to 15 months of assistance from the ERAP program, up to 12 months of arrears, plus an additional 3 months of stipends if need is demonstrated and funds are available. All right, last couple of questions here. What if a tenant loses income and can't afford the rent they agreed to pay in the agreement? In this case, the tenant should contact the Landlord and Rental Assistance Agency, or RA. If both parties are amenable to changing the agreement, the tenant would not have to reapply, but they would need to execute a new agreement. The new agreement would still need to comply with all ERAP requirements. If the tenant is unable to pay their share and defaults on the rental assistance agreement, then a landlord can begin the eviction proceedings by issuing a notice to quit. In some cases, we want to mention that the CARES Act may require a landlord to give 30 days notice for non-payment, depending on the type of financing that the landlord has, whether the landlord has sought mortgage forbearance, but we recommend you consult an attorney for guidance. And also during the CDC moratorium, which limits residential evictions for qualifying tenants, or the CDC moratorium, which limits residential evictions for qualifying tenants, has been extended through the end of June 2021. All right, next slide, please. Last one, and then we'll get to your question. Oh, and that is it. All right. Now we will receive your questions.
Great, Adam. I will tee up some of these questions and keep using that Q&A function. We've answered a bunch throughout the conversation, but we'll go through some of these now live as well. So is the 20 unit limit based on the total number of units in a specific building, or would it apply to a landlord who owns multiple smaller buildings through different but affiliated entities?
Yeah, so the 20 unit limit is based on the number of rental units that a property owner has throughout the Commonwealth, whether that's in one building or many. But we want to remind you, if you have more than, say you have 3 20-unit buildings, while you couldn't use the landlord door at this time, you could still encourage your tenants to apply for the ERAP program and make sure that and express your willingness to support them in that process and provide the necessary documentation.
Thanks, Adam. So this next question, I think, is referring to the slide about required documentation. So Gabby, wondering if you could flip back to that slide just to make sure we get it, because it's calling out a specific number and I don't know what it is calling. So it says number 4 details on assistance being requested include what kind of documents?
Sure. Yeah, that's actually no specific documents. Generally, no specific documents right there. It's well, the details on assistance being requested is typically if you're looking for stipends going forward or arrears going back. If you're looking for arrears going back, then we would require a ledger or a notice to quit or other document from the landlord stating the months that the tenant is behind and how much. So for example, that could be they owe $200 from March, $300 from January, $100 from December. So a document saying that. And that's also the place in the application where the tenant may indicate they need help paying utilities, for example, or if they're moving, they may need help with moving costs. So things that might not be directly related to many of you, but that's where they indicate what those needs are between arrears, stipends, utilities, and moving payments.
Thanks, Adam. All right, so also if a property is owned by an LLC, what would the proof of ownership document be needed in order to show who owns the LLC?
Great question. I wonder if we can circle back to this and perhaps by the end of this, we can share the full list of proof of ownership documents, but that could be a deed. Sometimes there are looking up in an assessor's database, but sometimes a water bill, if it's in the name of the owner, can work. But we can share the full list of proof of ownership documents. It's a great question.
Great. Maybe Liz, if you're on, maybe you can get that teed up and we'll share it. Okay, what if the tenants do not collaborate and do not pay rent for 11 months after March 13th, 2020?
I think a great opportunity to use the landlord door. So I would recommend indicating to the tenant that you are one way to address their arrearage and to avoid an eviction once the CDC moratorium ends is to have those arrears paid. So you can initiate an ERAP application as the landlord, have them sign their consent form, and move forward. So the great thing about ERAP is if they hadn't paid anything for 11 months, it's probably a fairly large arrearage. And the great thing with ERAP is ERAP can actually cover that in its entirety. So I would recommend you initiate an application.
Great. What if a tenant in a larger than 20 unit building signs a consent for a landlord to do the application? The landlord might be more tech savvy to help the process and help a tenant who qualifies.
Can you say that just one more time, Claire?
Sure. What if a tenant in a larger than 20 unit building signs a consent for the landlord to do the application on their behalf? The landlord might be more tech savvy to help the process and help a tenant who qualifies. So is that allowed?
Yeah, so unfortunately, you wouldn't be allowed to do that through the landlord door, but you could sit down with the tenant and help them through their application. So the tenant could still submit an application in that scenario. You couldn't do the landlord door per se, but we would encourage you to support the tenant in their in completing the application. Right, and I just want to pause quickly. We had the great question before about a tenant that might be unwilling to engage. I wanted to pass this off to Roberta Rubin, our general counsel, to perhaps talk a little bit about some of the mediation services that the Commonwealth is funding right now, and that may be able to help in those sorts of situations.
Sure, thank you, Adam. So one of the programs that we have stood up is a community mediation program where any party who is involved well upstream from the moment of a notice to quit can seek free services to help resolve problems. And while nobody can be forced to participate, we found that where there are problems between a landlord and a tenant that may go beyond simply needing money that often can be a really great way to get people to sit down and actually talk. So I'd encourage folks to provide information about community mediation to your tenants. It can really be a useful way. Honestly, I know folks may be a little antsy about having their tenants lawyer up, but the free legal services that are being provided as well can sometimes be a means of helping tenants understand their legal obligations. And the advocates can sometimes be very helpful in helping tenants to overcome reluctance to submit an application. People may be fearful for one reason or another about applying for assistance. And if they have somebody who's a trusted advocate on their side who can explain to them the benefits of getting assistance and reinstating their tenancy, that could be very helpful. Last thing I want to mention for the small landlords on the call in particular is that the KELP program also provides assistance for owner occupants who have up to 4 units in their property and live in. There are free legal services available to folks with incomes up to 200% of federal poverty, but also low-cost legal services available for folks with incomes up to 350% of the federal poverty line. And Volunteer Lawyers Project also operates a call-in line where people can receive referrals, answers to questions, a lot of educational programs being offered in communities around the Commonwealth. So a lot of additional assistance available.
Great, thank you, Roberta. That's helpful.
Okay. What is the expected time frame to receive funds once an application has been submitted? I know that this kind of depends on a lot of different factors, Adam.
Sure, yeah, so as you mentioned, it does unfortunately vary a little bit REA to REA. It's generally several weeks. In most cases, folks will be reached out to within several weeks, though it does vary based on what part of the where you are. One thing we would add is the applications that are processed the fastest are the ones that are complete. So to the extent that you can, whether you're applying on behalf of your tenant or your tenant is just applying directly, whenever you can help them include as much documentation as is requested, even the proof of ownership and the W-9, that can really help the application get processed as quickly as possible. So we want to talk a little bit about the kind of 2 ways that folks can access the ERAP program. For landlords that have 20 units or fewer across the Commonwealth, they can initiate the application through what we call the landlord door. That the application is largely the same as the regular ERAP, RAFT, and IRMA application with a few small tweaks. Again, that's for landlords that have 20 or fewer units across the Commonwealth. But then anybody, any tenant, regardless of whether they're in a 1-unit unit building owner occupied or in a development that's owned by a landlord with many units, they can always initiate an application directly themselves. In those cases, the landlord can still support that by providing additional information, can even provide a link to the application. So we'll be sure to share that application, but both the landlord application and the tenant application are available at each REA's website. And we'll be sharing the links to that application shortly.
Yep, I did already, Adam, ping in the chat a link to where everyone can find which regional administering agency they should be searching for. So we can reshare that again in the chat.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Regardless of whether a tenant applied or a landlord applied, can landlords check on the status of an application? And maybe also would be worth Adam reiterating kind of the notification that are happening now.
Sure. So if you're wondering about the status of an application, that's a great question. Generally, if you've been reached out to by the RAA, generally they will, particularly to get the W-9 form, you can reach out to the respond and say, here's my W-9 here, or proof of ownership. Can you give me an update on the status? The RAAs are generally willing to do that. And the notification cadence does vary a little bit REA to REA. There are phone numbers for the REAs that you can call and ask about the status.
So I don't see any other questions that haven't been answered yet. So if you still have questions, please ping them to us in the chat, and Adam or Roberta can help answer them. These have been some really great questions, so thank you so much for asking them.
All right, well, hearing no further questions, we can go forward and talk about some final resources and additional information for you all. All right, so we have a DHCD landlord landing page for more information on ERAP. That'll include links to the application, as well as other services like the mediation centers that Roberta was mentioning. We also will have a recording of this session that will be shared and uploaded onto our website. We also have a survey. We really want to get a better understanding of what are the needs of small landlords. So really encourage you to take a few minutes to respond to the survey. We want to make sure that this program works for you, and welcome your thoughts on how we can continue improving it. And then finally, on community mediation, there is a specific website for community mediation, and local nonprofits are available to help landlords and tenants resolve disputes, whether that's related to non-payment or anything else. With that,
I think,
yes, go ahead.
I was just say we are getting a few more questions in, but if you want to maybe repeat, just reiterate, about the application process and properties.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So largely, I think about it, there are really two ways to get to receive ERAP. One for you all, that's our landlord door. 20 properties with 20 units or property owners with 20 units or fewer can initiate an application on behalf of their tenant. That means really, while we still require a tenant consent form, the landlord can go through the process and click submit. That's really the big difference between the regular way for tenants to apply, which is just through an application portal on the REA's website. And both ways are perfectly acceptable. You could have a tenant that is in a building with fewer than 20 units, and they want to apply on their own, or maybe they already have, and that's perfectly acceptable. Both ways work great. The one thing we really emphasize is complete applications really help. So again, you can find those applications on the DHCD landlord landing page, and you'll each application exists on each REA's website. There are 11 REAs across the state, corresponding to different geographic regions. But again, tenants can apply themselves, or landlords who have 20 property owners with 20 or fewer units can also initiate an application.
All right. Well, we just had some of those questions get answered via the chat, actually, Adam. So looks like we don't have anybody else, but we have a few more minutes, so let's just wait to see if we do have any. I've been pinging in the chat hopefully you can see all the links to these resources. Again, that the EDI portal, the landing page on DHCD, as well as that landlord survey. So we'll continue to have resources posted there, and I will ping a link to the FAQ document as well.
Great. Thank you all very much. Big thanks to Claire and our team for helping pull this together. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have additional questions, and we hope these materials will be useful to you. Thank you again, and we hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.